We're recording. Okay, my name is Suzy Loeber, and I'm a volunteer with the Hastings Historical Society. And today is March 29th. We're at the Hastings Library, and the purpose of this recording is for me to interview Adele Dahlberg, a Hastings resident, as part of the Historical Society's oral history project. So, Adele, can you tell me how long you've lived here in Hastings?
We came in 1972. We bought our house in early 1972. So it will be 40 years next year, 39 years as of now.
Wow. And when you say we, who are you talking about?
Oh, my husband and I, my late husband and I, came... we were Manhattan people for years. We loved the city life. He was a professor at Queens College. Then we got interested in hiking and so we would leave the city and then have to drive back in again on the weekends. And it seemed sensible, perhaps, to move in not too far from Manhattan because of the commuting. We were both working. So we first had an apartment. We rented an apartment on Garth Road in Scarsdale because the commuting there is very good. The trains run every half hour, and we liked the town very much. We had very close friends, longtime Hastings residents. And when we started thinking about buying a house instead of renting an apartment forever, they said, "Oh, do come over to Hastings. It's wonderful," and we had visited them here many times. So we came and we started looking at houses, and that was the beginning of it. We saw many things, nothing that really suited our purposes. We had no children, so we didn't need a very large house, but we needed space because of books. I mean, as a teacher, and I was in publishing, and this is a very big part of our life. Then our friends heard about a house in the Pinecrest area of Hastings, and she said, "You really must look at it. Come see it anyway. It's small, it needs a lot of work, but once you see the neighborhood and the river," which is, of course, a big draw, and that was it.
So now, where is your house?
Our house is in the Pinecrest area. We're on Pinecrest Parkway, which is the dead-end street. There are two main streets in the Pinecrest area. Pinecrest Drive, you come in and out on the drive, and then you turn off the drive into the Parkway, which a lot of people who from the city think is going to be a parkway, as the north and south corridor roads are, and of course it's not. It's called Hastings is wonderful. It was sort of put together, little pieces here and there, and they called it a parkway because we have two islands down the main part of the street, planted islands. So you come in on one side of the island and then you drive around and you go out the other. And it makes a nice tree-filled, in those days there were even more flowering bushes. But anyway, very attractive that way.
Can I just ask you a quick question?
Oh, surely.
Now, what's your husband's name? What was your husband's name?
My husband's name was Charles Dahlberg.
Okay. And who were the friends that introduced you to Hastings?
Mavis and, oh my goodness, this is what happens when you get to be my age. Names go. Mavis and John Reardon. He was a mathematician at Bell Labs for years, and when he retired, then it was about the time we knew him. He was still at Bell Labs when we first knew them. He was given an office at Rockefeller down in Manhattan where you sit and think. It's wonderful. And she was a literary agent under the name of Mavis McIntosh. They were McIntosh and Otis, who, of course, are long gone now. And in the days when publishing was was so personal, and it was so, it was so lovely. I absolutely adored it. And she was my mentor. They were older than we were by 15, 16 years, somewhere in there, but young in heart, and the kind of people, there is no age barrier, you know. You know some of these people. It's quite remarkable. So, and they lived on Flower Avenue. Now, is that enough of that?
Yes, I just wanted to make sure. Now, when you purchased your home, who did you buy it from? Do you recall?
Yes, I do. It was Streb was the agency, and Marilyn, she was a lovely person. What was her name? Marilyn. That's gone too. That's a long time ago. She's no longer selling real estate as far as I know. She was about our age, I would say. I was in my early 40s. My husband was 6 years older than I. He was possibly 50 then. And it was really quite interesting because we saw the house and we thought, we'll never be able to fit into this. It's too small. There are no closets. It needs so much work. So we called her and said, we loved it in one way, but it's just, we're not going to be able to fit in. So then we got to thinking it over, and we called her back, and she was lovely and said, yes, come see it again. I don't mind at all. And this went on for a couple more times. Then we finally said, Marilyn, it's not going to work. It's simply, we can't figure it out space-wise, the closet. This house was built at a period when people didn't have all the stuff we have today. They just didn't. Okay. So then she called us, and then after we had done that, suddenly I found out how we could do it, what we could do inside, and what could be put in and moved around. And she called us, and she said, I have a funny feeling that you've been thinking about this house, and you're too embarrassed to call me back, which was true. And that did it. That really did it.
Okay.
So.
Now, when you say the house was built when people didn't have many possessions, do you know when your house was built?
Oh, yes. It wasn't a very, very old house. It was in the 30s, somewhere in the 30s, 1930s. But those were the days where people had a winter coat and a spring coat and maybe a jacket in between. And you know what we all have today. And they didn't have zillions of shoes and a whole lot of other things. It's just rather curious. I'm not making a judgment call here, but it was a fact. So you had a reasonably small closet in each bedroom, for instance. And, anyway, so that was part of it, besides
now, what number,
wall space.
Sorry, what number on Pinecrest?
41.
41.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So now, when you first moved in to the Pinecrest area, do you recall who any of your neighbors were when you first got there?
Oh, yes.
Okay, who was there?
Well, all right. This neighborhood had gone through a lot of changes. And one thing that really was very good for us was at that point there was a very active Pinecrest Association. Because there had been various problems, now I have to be careful. Graham's School in those days. The kids who were there were not supervised well enough, and they were wandering and breaking into houses. So I think this was part of why that was started. It was very active when we got there, and of course we jumped into it right away because we are interactive people. And, of course, this is how you meet people. Neighborhood associations, by the way, are absolutely wonderful, especially for newcomers, because you see everybody, you know their names, they know you meet face to face, and there's all this interaction. Now, going by who's still there, let's do it this way. The Grays, you know the Gray Harris. The ones who are there now are probably children of the original ones. There was the original Grays really hardly lived there. They bought the house, and their children, their adult children, when they were here. Judy Gray, who was Juliet, her name was Juliet, but we all called her Judy. She was she was so much fun. She and I we just clicked. We'd see each other on the street and fall into each other's arms. She had a couple of kids here that she put through school. Anyway, the current people who are there, I think, is a younger sister. I'm not certain of this. Ramona?
Yes.
And she has kids who are now, so they're long time people. The Adams lived on the drive behind me and one house over, so our yards touched. And we became very close, very good friends, socialized together, gardened together, traded birthdays, etc., etc. Kenneth Clark was further down on the drive. He was a personality presence, but he didn't interact, at least in the years that we were there. He was busy, of course, with his work, but at the same time, he was not a physical presence with the rest of us. Next to him, in the house that the Richmonds own now, Richmond Friedman or something, was a doctor, and I can't remember. I meant to look up. I have an old telephone directory. I wish I brought that along. I can't remember their name. Lovely couple, social workers. They were black. The persons who were directly behind me are still there. He's a photographer, and they raised their child there. They're my age. They're in their 80s now. The Bullens just sold their house, but they weren't here. That was Peter Schweik and his mother.
I'm sorry, what was the last name?
Schweik.
Schweik.
I don't know how you spell it.
Right. Okay.
And his father was a doctor and had died before we came anyway. They had the big house. Anastasia, good friend of mine, further down on the drive, around the corner from the Grays. There are two modern houses there now. All right. Then beyond that is a house on the riverside. That was the Anastasia house. She was a Leonard. Dr. Leonard was her father. He was not a medical doctor. He was an educator. And he and his wife bought the property and built the house in 1914. She was born in 1918. I remember all this because she was telling me all about the story. And his Dr. Leonard's two maiden sisters owned a small, charming house next where the two modern houses are now. Okay, there's a lot of history there. You probably don't want me to go into all of that right now. Merton, her mother, Vanessa, is there now, probably with her sister and her kids. They originally lived in another house on Pinecrest Drive. But anyway, they were in where they are now when we moved here, and her mother was alive by then. The mother and father had divorced, and I forget, Bob was off somewhere.
Bob is the father?
Bob, yes, I think his name was Robert. Anyway, the son, Robert Merton, was the one who, within our time, won a Nobel Prize. And we had another Nobel, Vickery's down, who was another friend of mine. They were on Warburton. these were people who were part of the association on Warburton and then also up on Broadway. A lot of interesting people on Broadway. Now, who else coming around? Moraine was here. You know that house. And it was the father was the one who was here when we first came. And he was here for quite a long time. He was, I would say, getting slightly elderly, let's put it that way. Probably a little sen. I used to wander up and down with his dog. He didn't have it on a leash. He had it on a piece of rope. A character. But okay. The Levy's, she is still here. She's nearly 100. Good friends of ours through just the neighborhood. She's very alert at her age. We talk now and then, but of course she's at home all the time with caretakers. The Wyatts, next to the Levy's, they eventually retired. I think he was with the UN. There was some diplomatic association there. Oh, you want me to go on with all of this?
I'm
names?
just curious as to who lived in the neighborhood when you were there. Yes.
Yeah. Next to Wyatt, I don't remember. And there maybe the couple who are still there now. No. The couple who bought the Wyatt house. Then we have Mrs. Warga with her son. She was a widow. Kay someone, a woman. Oh, and then a family from Manhattan. They were psychologists, and they had one child, but they loved Manhattan, and they finally just went back to Manhattan. It was they couldn't take. I mean, anyway. Oh, and then a very odd old woman directly across the street from us, and her husband died almost immediately. She was rather odd, and she had 2 dogs that barked morning, noon, and night. Ooh, this was bad. Next to them was the Gallic family. This was very interesting because the house across the street from me was quite large, and it had originally a garage with an apartment over it for a caretaker. And the Gallics came way before we did, and they were from Yonkers, and they had 3 kids, which they put through college, and they were a really great family. And by the time we came, the children were adults. 2 of them were married, and one was living with her mother, Mildred Gallic. The son had gone to Cornell and become an architect, and what he did with the house, he was the one who redid the house and turned it into a real house from the garage. And you wouldn't even know today what it had been. Going on, Mr. Black, nice man, elderly. His daughter finally persuaded him to come and live with her. Next to him, a middle-aged couple who then retired. These were 2 smaller houses, but in very nice condition, very well taken care of. Then we come to Noisy, and beyond him one more, Bonnie Baya in those days, who became Bonnie Hart. And then nothing, because the property up on Broadway came all the way down to the Parkway. But what was really interesting was that up on Broadway was Miriam Begg, B-E-G-G, whose husband was a very well-known book designer with Macmillan Publishing House. He had died by the time we came, but they owned, their house was a funny little thing. It looked almost like a shack clinging to the slope, but they owned three other lots going north, which she sold off one by one, and those three modern houses that are up on Broadway now behind us were put in. And then she finally decided, I think, to move to Florida. And Peter Capuana, who is do you know Peter? The Capuanas.
I know
here.
the family.
You know the family,
right?
Okay. Peter, who at that point owned, he had the pharmacy, Greenleaf. Peter heard about this, so he bought Mrs. Begg's house, tore it down, and then built a much bigger house, but with an entrance on Pinecrest Parkway. So, of course, we were all there the day the house came down. It was a neighborhood thing, and it was heartbreaking. I don't know. It was just a great part of the past. It wasn't a wonderful house. It didn't matter, I suppose, that it came down, but any house that comes down like that, I have never been through such an experience. Wow. It's interesting. We were all standing there, and I remember my neighbor and I just looked at each other, and I don't know, and we walked away without, it's just like a funeral.
Like an old friend,
yeah,
right?
Like
saying goodbye to an old friend. Yes.
Who had died or something.
Yes.
Okay. So that's that side of the street. And then clear down at the other end, we had 4 houses. One was owned by a much older couple who were probably the age I am now. They were very, very nice. And they used to walk. You'd take their morning walk. Then there was a rental house, a house that was rented. I don't remember who owned it. And then there were 2 unfinished houses. They were started maybe in the late 20s. Probably around then. And then either the money gave out or something. So they were kind of finished from the outside, but they'd never really been finished on the inside. And they were owned by David Totora, who was the police chief in Hastings, I think, when we moved here. And next to the 2 that were undone was another Totora family. I don't know if he did anything locally here, but then he wound up as the superintendent of public works, I think, in Greenburgh. I don't know, something like that. Then we come, next to them was a woman by the name of DeCelli. I'm not getting into racial things now. I'll get into that in a minute. Very nice woman. And then the next to that was Lois Black, who was one of the original occupants of the Moraine property with her first husband. Okay. And she returned to Hastings with her 2 children and raised them there. They went through schools here. We knew them. Lois was a nice person. I liked her. Then there's the break. Then the O'Briens, who were here. They were school teachers or something. They didn't mix. I won't get into why. And then there's kind of a break with a path that goes down between Pinecrest Parkway to the lower Pinecrest Drive, and it's about 10 feet wide, and it is owned by the village because underneath all of this, the sewer comes and turns. Okay. So, let's see, then we had the Messmers were here when we came, and they're gone now. They went to New Mexico. Then we had, Jerry Dickstein. He was here when we came. And he got into financial difficulties, and he had to sell his house. So it was too bad because they loved the house. And then us.
Okay.
And then another family next to us. They're still here. They were a very young couple who came, and they're still here. And then the Stearns, who were here, Alan and Ruth, who were good friends of ours. We used to see a lot of them. Alan has died now a couple of years ago. And then, then you see we had a lot of empty space, really, that we had between the Stearns and Moraine. It was trees and stuff. Moraine owned up to them, from his stone house on the corner all the way to the Stearns. And this was maybe 10 years after we moved here, he sold off 4 lots. 2 on our street and 2 down on the drive. And a man by the name of Cuneo bought the whole thing, and he built himself a house and the other 3 houses for, what's the word? An investment.
Speculation.
Speculate, right. Yeah, on spec.
On
okay.
spec.
Yeah.
Right.
But very nicely designed and very attractive and very large and very expensive. So that was land that went. Where Capuana, that was land that went in a way. On the corner, across from Moraine, where there now is a house where the Hopkins lived, that was a vacant lot because the house next to it was owned by Rutan.
I'm sorry, what was that name?
Rutan, R-U-T-T-A-N. Yeah, you can go back, you can track down these names probably. Dick and his wife, and they had twin daughters. And they moved, let's see, did he die anyway, they went to California. Yeah, I guess they moved to California, and they sold the house to Bonnie, who was Bonnie Hart by then. And the Harts decided to sell off the land to this corner. They, and they didn't want it. This was probably a rather foolish thing to do, but so they did, and a house was put up there. I think their name was Fry, a young couple, and it was a modular, which that was always very interesting to see. This was quite attractive, really quite attractive, and it was a split level thing. So but anyway, the point why I'm telling you this is because that was another piece of land that suddenly had a house on it. So what you have today, the whole place has a quite different look and different feel than it did when we came. But this is progress. So those are some names for you.
Let me ask you this. You said that you became part of the association.
Mm-hmm.
I know that, I guess, based on what you said, I understand that part of it was the concern about making sure that the Graham School children didn't do things that they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
But what other things did the association do?
Well, we always had a traffic problem. We have never to this day solved that, especially on the drive. Of course, the parkway was in the beginning very wonderful. You could walk up and down, and there was very little traffic. But now, of course, the cars. But the drive has always been a kind of through thing, and it's very narrow, and it curves a lot. And there's the speeding problem, not neighbor people, but just people coming through. And, of course, now there are more trucks, there are more school buses, and, so that was something. We tried everything. There was some concern about should they make it one way. And, of course, this would be very difficult for the fire department, the police department, and everything. And the people who lived there, you could only come in one way and go out the other. We discussed speed bumps. All right, all of this is small. Then we get into the larger things. We got into Hastings-on-Hudson, which was originally just a residence. But that's another interesting story, but we don't get into that today. But anyway, they decided that they wanted to turn themselves into a continuing care facility, and they lined themselves up with, I think it was Beth Abraham or some group who knew how to do that, and that it would have involved 4 new buildings, blasting, a whole lot of stuff. That now we didn't begin the opposition. There was a group in Hastings from the other side, beyond and along in Tompkins in that area, who were very distressed about this, and they got together and really started the resistance, and we decided to join them. Now, I'm not saying that everyone in our neighborhood felt that way, but enough of us did. So we participated in that. We were interested in keeping the gardening going in the neighborhood and the islands and this sort of thing, that kind of thing. So
the association took care of the islands too?
Well, no, what we did, we met and we tried to encourage various families to get together and, do it. Keep things, this was more on the Parkway, although people from who liked to garden would come up. And we had a committee for that. I was on that. And we would meet just in general to keep in touch. I don't remember how often those meetings were. They certainly weren't once a month, but they were every few months. We would have a party occasionally, a get-together that way. We had a street, we had one of the original street tag sale things where, practically every house had something out. And that was a great success. People liked that. And then we'd get together for potluck after the end of the day. And the kids had their lemonade stands and all of this. This was kind of a get-together. And the dues were so expensive, like $10 a year. So it was that sort of thing.
Okay. The other thing that I wanted to follow up on was that you mentioned that one of the things that prompted you and your husband to really consider Hastings was that your love of hiking. Mm-hmm. So what went on with respect to hiking when you got here?
Well, there was always the aqueduct, and we used to use that quite a bit. But in those days, the Taconic park system or something is the one who owns that or runs it. And they were not maintaining it, and it was overgrown, and the dog walkers were very bad about their animals, and so you would find yourself walking Indian file, one behind the other, and then if someone came at you riding their bike, and you had to, so we sort of stopped that, and then we began going further north and across the river into Bear Mountain, and, that sort of thing. And then we discovered, we rediscovered Switzerland, so we started going there in the summer. But during the year, we would. So we got very interested in the aqueduct, and which has become very active now. And of course, we joined this old Croton Aqueduct group they've done an awful lot. And are continuing to do it. And also the Taconic people are doing a little more maintaining. But it's not easy, and, money, of course. It's that sort of thing. And then we used to walk around Hastings a lot. When we had a thing that would take us about an hour. We'd go over to about Flower Avenue and Park, and we took us all the way around the upper part of Dobbs Ferry and up and down. What we wanted was up and down, because you need the up is much better for you. Going down is very bad. I mean, it's okay, but it's easy. What you need is the pull. So we did that.
Let me ask you this. I know that your husband worked in Queens and you worked in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you get to work once you moved to Hastings?
Well, I was, by the time we came to Hastings, I was doing more freelancing. And I didn't have a regular job in Manhattan. And the other thing is I loathe commuting. I had my fill of it from the Scarsdale end. You get up in the early morning and you have to get out and get on the train and then at the end of the day, and I was never sure when I'd get out of my office. This was not 9 to 5. This was at least 6 or later, depending what was going on. And you get on the train and come home, and people are falling asleep on you, and it's crap. And it was just in the end, I got kind of fed up with it. So I did some freelancing through Mavis. And then I just decided, okay, I've had enough. And we had a lot of activities and things that we did in Manhattan, which we did continue to do. And I would often meet Charles in the city. And I would take the train in, and then we'd drive home together. And then, of course, I started gardening, and became my job, and which I can no longer do, which is too bad. And that was wonderful. I loved doing that. I did a little volunteer work out here at the library. I was on. I didn't have a regular slot. I was a fill-in. So that if someone couldn't come, one of the volunteers couldn't come, they had a list, and I was on the list.
Now, about the library, let me just ask this. Is it the same building that we're in today?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Well, this was the old library.
Okay. Was it at this spot, but it was a different building?
No, it's.
Oh.
Let me think now what it looked like. It's you get so used to a place now. The downstairs, there was a room down there, but nothing like what they have today. Oh no, I think the stacks were down there. Probably. You'd have to ask when the librarians.
Okay.
This part I don't remember. I know I remember going down, but it seems to me it was books. I mean, just stacks. Ruth Leslie was the librarian then. She's still in town, but a long time retired. And a Ruth Jacobson or something was the children's librarian. And that whole end where the kids are has been greatly extended. And I'm trying to remember about, of course, we had none of these rooms. Oh, the reference area came all the way across. In this end, the art books and stuff were here.
Right. We're talking the northwest corner of the building.
The northwest corner.
Right.
Yeah, and none of this division and rooms. This was not there at all. And anyway, the reference area, we had, of course, this is pre-internet day and pre-computer day. So there were just a lot more books, and the catalog, it was still the little cards and everything. Janet Murphy, probably at that point, was if not then, certainly she came on as a reference librarian, and of course she was really quite wonderful and nice. So that was this whole end.
The north end.
The north end.
Right.
I have a feeling that it stopped kind of here, and that maybe all of this is new.
Right. Yeah, there was a recent renovation, like in 2002 or something. They might have extended it. toward the river.
Toward the river, yeah. And then, of course, they made something much bigger or more open downstairs on the other end. No, that I think is also, they added on the south end, both up and down. I don't think that was on there then. I think it just was cut off. And when they did that, they went this way.
Right. I was just curious. I don't recall when they actually, this building, the original building, was built. So I was wondering if it was the same. That's the only reason why I asked.
No, Mrs. Benedict gave the money. It was built after the hall, the main, which also has been extensively done over. That was much.
Village Hall.
The Village Hall, was much. It wasn't the exterior. I don't think changed. It was the interior that they did over because it was much more cramped. But the library was here when we came. I don't remember when Mrs. Benedict gave the money. She's the one who also built Hastings-on-Hudson. Her father was a mayor in Yonkers, and she married someone and had tons of money, but she was a very nice woman, and she liked Hastings. She also gave the money for the North Yonkers Community Church, which is there just beyond Pinecrest.
Right. Let me ask you this: when get into a little bit about life in the downtown area, where did you go grocery shopping?
Well, this was interesting. The A&P had been built. That was there. But it was much. It was smaller and more cramped and kind of dirtier. Not that it's wonderful now. And of course, it's been done over a couple of times. And now this is kind of interesting. Riola's Meat Market was still here. Now that's where the corset shop is now. Do you know the corset shop?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Right on, it's on Warburton.
It's on Warburton. There's the alley and the coffee, the diner and the alley, and then the corset shop. And that was Riola's Meat Market, as I recall. And we did buy some meat there. And across the street where Prime Meats this is still called Prime Meats, although the Koreans own it now, was the Associated, which is it's a small chain. They had one over in Scarsdale. I don't know where they all are anyway, but it was a very small supermarket, smaller than the A&P, but it had what you needed. Oh, we got into this thing about the bakery. Now, I wish we could track that down, because now I'm going to tell you something about memory. Memory is a funny thing. Years go on, and sometimes something is totally wiped out until someone reminds you of it. And in other cases, your memory's right, but it's distorted. So my memory of that is that you went up at least one step to get into it. Now, where they've been turned into restaurants now since then. Manzy's, there were two Manzy's. There was Manzy, and then another Manzy, and now it's and then there was the Mexican place. Okay, but originally there was as I recall, a bakery there. Not a fancy bakery, and it probably was mostly bread. In the old days, people bought bread. They liked bread, bakery bread, and possibly donuts or something. I don't remember a lot of cakey things. And maybe one reason I don't is because we probably went there for bread, just, my homemade bread. Now, I'm not sure of that memory, but there must be pictures somewhere along the line.
Right.
Because that building, I'm not kicking you.
No.
That building is not a new building. If you stand across the street and look at it, you can kind of tell it's been done over. It has apartments upstairs with a door on one side. So that's my memory of that.
What about, you mentioned Greenleaf. Was that pharmacy there?
Yeah, that was a pharmacy. That was Jacobson's. And there's a Jacobson's down still, I think, in Yonkers. And this may have been a kind of branch up here. And then I think Peter bought it and changed the name. And then he was there, all those years. There was another grocery store, another pharmacy across the street, Hastings Drug, which is where there is now that new sushi Japanese place. And then there's something, I was thinking about this the other day that we've forgotten for years. Next to the Warburton Firehouse, where there's a restaurant now called Juniper's. Okay, originally that was Smallheiser's jewelry store. He was there for years and years and years. They were a local family, I believe.
What's the name? I'm sorry.
Smallheiser. So that's another thing where you can probably get into that. That was still there. He was getting on in years, and then he eventually retired. Oh, now in Boulanger, we always called it Boulanger, but it's Boulanger, I guess. The parking lot.
Yes.
Now, next to Peter, going towards the alley, is...
when you're talking about Peter, you're talking about the pharmacy?
Greenleaf.
Yes.
No, Greenleaf. Is... it's now, I think, a chiropractor, as I recall. There's a little garden out.
Yes.
All right. That originally was Maxine Gerard. She was a real estate agent. And there were a lot of real estate agents in town, oddly enough, when we moved here. Another one was Robertson Perch, which is where the post office is now. The southern part of the post office was a separate private office. And when Robertson Perch went out of business, the post office then bought their space. And it's now all post office, but there was Danola Perch, and she married Perrotin, and then they left town. And now, on the alley by the post office, then the next building, there's a veterinarian.
Yes, I know where you're talking about.
All right, the Adams, our friends, the Adams, owned that building because they had their press there. They were Westchester County Press, which was a newspaper that served the black community of Westchester. And they owned that building, and then they eventually sold it while we were Alger was still alive.
Alger Adams, he was the Reverend, right?
Wasn't he
a Reverend?
Yes, he was. And he had no regular church at the time that we knew him, but he was getting on, and not really that old, but he would take the service in the summer for a church in New Rochelle and somewhere else. I don't think he did here in Hastings at Grace Church. Oh, there was Father somebody when we first came, and then eventually, of course, Betty Hudson. Did you ever meet? Oh, she was here for a long time. A wonderful woman, absolutely wonderful woman. She's gone now, and she's been replaced by another woman at Grace Church. But Alger, he was mainly doing his newspaper when we moved here and when we knew them at that point, although he was still, as I say, filling in the summer with the other. And they had a lot of contacts all over the place. They were very close to Father, I can't think of his name now, down at St. John's Cathedral. You know where that is.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And in fact, they're both buried there. Their ashes are in the columbarium. Pat could tell you that, or I mean, her daughter. You have to get into all. I've forgotten we went to the funeral. I know all about it, but I've kind of forgotten about it.
Right.
I was trying to think. We have more restaurants now. We didn't have the restaurants in those days that we have now. This was not so much a restaurant town in those days. It has become a little more so since then. On the corner of Main and Warburton, where there's a kind of consignment shop.
Yes, I
that
know
was
which-
Ben's son's department store, which you may have heard of. This was kind of, it had men's wear and boys wear. It was more on the male side, and he was there when we came.
And who's Ben's son? Is that's the
well,
name of the...
no, it was Ben S-U and then S-U-N hyphen, and I don't know whether it was two men and a partners, and it was part of each of their name. I really don't know. There was Ben was Ben someone, and he was a person that we had met there, but I don't. And then where the shoe store now is, that was Hastings Bootery, and I think he owned that as well. I'm pretty sure he did, although it was called the Bootery. If you get an old phone book, I had one from back then, and go through the green pages or whatever they are, you will see a lot of names of things that might jog you into something. Good Yarns was on Warburton to begin with.
And Good Yarns was a bookstore,
And
right?
it was a bookstore with, the reason it was called Good Yarns was because it also had knitting yarns and a place in the back where they gave lessons and where all the knitters came. So that was the Good Yarns end of it as well. And then there was the play on a book or a story is a yarn, as you know. And I can't remember the name of the two people, but they were two very interesting ladies here, local people in town.
Who owned Good Yarns?
Yes. Mm-hmm. One of them was more in the yarns end of it, and one was in the book end of it. Oh, Suki, what was her last name, was the book person. And then, I'm trying to think what happened. Either they lost their lease, or there was a fire. Anyway, I've lost what happened. And by then, where they wound up on Main Street, that building then had been done over and turned into several little shops, and there was even a hairdresser. You went through their place to go downstairs and all the rest of that, and they took that space over. And so they were there for a long time. And then she left. I think she moved. I don't remember where Suki moved. She may still be alive somewhere. I think she went to New England, and they sold the business. Kind of going along. There have been a lot of changes on Main Street. Next to Riola's real estate office, if you're facing his office to the right, is now Dr. Turgis's office. But originally it was the chiropractors in town, and they were the ones who got permission to come clear out to the sidewalk. Before that, it was still a house in the back. I don't remember on that one. And then they moved. Next to Citibank, there is now a building with the doctor in it, and that they got permission. The chiropractors bought the little house in the back, and then again they got permission to come all the way out to the sidewalk, which we didn't approve of in town. But anyway, and that erased the little house in the back, there's another little house next to it now that's still there. You can see that next to the ambulance place. Well, there were two of those. And originally that whole area, way back in the sands of time, were people who had little houses, and they had chickens, and they had God knows what, But this is a long time ago, way before we came.
Okay. Let me ask you this: where did you go, or was there a place to go buy your newspaper?
That's been there forever, and those people. They retired to Florida, and their daughter and her husband ran it for a long time. Harry, I think he was, and I don't remember his name. Anyway, then they sold it to the, I guess they're Koreans who are in there now, but the daughter still has the art shop next to Corey Glass. So the name is available. I don't remember, but all right.
But that's where you went into what I would call the stationery store there.
The stationery
that's where you got your newspaper.
Well, we had the Times delivered.
Oh, you delivered.
Yes,
okay,
delivered. But they had the magazines and they had the stationery and the greeting cards.
Okay.
Which was so that was always there. So that really takes care of that because you have the diner and the stationery store, and then what was Benson's. Now, going the other way, there was a florist where Indigo, you know Indigo?
Yes.
All right.
I know where Indigo is now.
All right, was a florist, and they were there for a long time. And then they finally closed. And no, I don't think there's anything else, is there, before the hardware store? Nana's was still here, which is next to the parking lot, the post office parking lot, and is now a chiropractor. No, an acupuncturist.
What's Nana's?
Nana was a place to eat, a little... It was in. There was a long story about it in the Hastings Historian, by the way. Which
okay.
You'd have to read about sometime. It was a man was the cook there, and he was famous for his pies, and the locals used to eat there a lot. I mean, and that was. I think it was still there when we came, but it was not a place that we went to at all. And then, of course, Nancy Caruso had the Cup and Saucer later across the street where Comfort, which has gone out of business, is, or something, next to the Vets.
Right. And what was the Cup and Saucer?
Well, the Cup and Saucer was a hangout for the kids. It was not a coffee shop, like a soda shop. That was also written up recently in the Historian, and so rather than my telling you about it, you can look that all up and read about it. And Nancy, of course, has been around town for years. She was at the schools, at the voting. I don't remember what her title was. And her husband had a printing shop here for a while. No, her son, her son had the printing shop. She's still around. I occasionally see her. Office Inc. along there, that's gone now. That opened while we were here.
Oh, it did.
Before that, I think there was a lawyer in there. Cowell, Kowal, and then he left. The health food store, that was Blanche Marchetti, another wonderful woman whose husband did real estate with Riolo, and that had been originally a bar. And the old bar was still in there when Blanche took over, and she used it as kind of a lunch counter. Eventually that's been taken out. Now, I don't know where that went. Someone probably bought that because it was really quite something, one of those old-fashioned mahogany things.
Now, was Hastings Hardware and Electric there? That was there.
That was there when we came.
Right.
That probably has been there a long time, because the father, it would be like the grandfather probably of whoever's running it now. Rooster, he was called. He was one of the original people in also our volunteer fire department. He was very active in that. And when we came, the father was alive. In fact, I remember him coming and redoing the electricity in our house, which was about ready to burn the place down. He said, I don't know how they ever got away with this, but he was overstating things, But we had to update the electricity because there were too many things on the lines, and the plumbing. Freitag, Paul Freitag, who's gone now. He was Hastings Plumbing and Heating. Very interesting man. He and his partner.
That was a different business, not the electric.
No, yes, different, much different. But
Okay.
they were the Hastings people in those days. They were the real Hastings people, and they were the fire department and the emergency and the ambulance again, volunteers, great, wonderful people, absolutely superb. What else? Oh, River Run, the bookstore on Washington Avenue. Very interesting. Now, we used to go there. We had a group that met. We read Shakespeare's plays together once a month. And that was originally owned by Frank Sosha. He was a book salesman originally for one of the large houses in New York, but he loved books, and he just bought books and books and books, and he started this thing. He had a feel for it, and they're still there. His daughter's, Louise's husband, Chris Stevens, is running it now. Maybe the two of them are running it, and that was a kind of center for. They had a little jazz group that used to meet there. Just people coming together for whatever, maybe some readings and things. We used to, as I say, we were there, a whole bunch of us around town who were Shakespeare people.
Well, who else was involved in reading the Shakespeare's plays once a month and meeting to discuss it?
Florence Levy, Charles and Adele Dahlberg, John and Mary Morris. He was a trustee at one point. He's still in town. She has died. Kevin Ettinger, Linda Tucker, whose husband was a high school. You know, if your kid is in high school, you knew. No. He was a social studies teacher, I think. I mean, the kids were crazy about him. Bob Tucker, was it? That doesn't sound right. Linda? Maybe it was Robert Tucker. I didn't know. I knew Linda he didn't come with her. She came. And then we had some sort of people who would come and not come. They weren't there all the time. I think Helen Baroni, and then a nice man from Dobbs Ferry. Cipriani, is that his? I don't remember, but anyway. Like that. And Mary Sosha, the widow of Frank, who built the business and owned it. He didn't, and it was a terrible old wreck of a building, and cold in the winter and hot in the summer, and it creaked, and it was full of dust, and we loved it.
So I'm just curious about this. Everyone decided to read a particular play. You'd read it, and then you'd meet to talk about it?
We would meet to read aloud.
Oh.
None of us were actors. None of us were from the theater, but we loved theater, and we loved Shakespeare, and so what we did, we would decide 1 month to the next, and we would try to get through a play. Some of them which were longer, might take 2 meetings, and then we would have parts. They would I forget whether somebody ahead of Mary and someone, and it would decide who was going to do what. Or maybe the night when we met, we would decide. This has been out of business now for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. And then we would just take parts and read it. It was wonderful, and sometimes it was hilarious. And but it was so, when you hear it out loud and you're doing it yourself, and no one was self-conscious, it was really quite interesting to us. I don't know, what people on the outside probably would have thought we were crazy. So that's what that was all about. And we would discuss to some degree, because my husband, of course, knew a lot about Shakespeare and had a lot of things to say about that. And the others, I mean, if you like Shakespeare, it means you've been either reading it and going to Shakespeare forever, and so it's not as though it was anything brand new.
Now, what about, you mentioned that sometimes there was a little jazz group that played there?
Yes,
who was that?
I don't know can't tell you who those were. That you'd have to ask someone. I'm trying to think who could track that down for you. I don't know. It's just a clue. I'll just have to lay that one on the table.
Okay.
And that, of course, that was Frank started that when he was alive. And how long that went on, I don't know. It's like people today. They get together and they.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm just trying to think of anything else, kind of out of the way sort of things. The town was quite different then. It wasn't. I think we've had a lot more Manhattan brought in, for one thing, which is fine in one way. I was thinking how as things change and move along, it's quite difficult to think back exactly how one felt about things or what you were seeing 40 years ago. It's quite a long time, considering how much change has gone on. Now in some places you could live and it's actually the same as it's ever been. And maybe people have moved on or whatever, but I would say that things are in one way, it's funny, things are the same, but they're not in Hastings. I think the fact that so many stores have changed from one thing to another is part of what makes it difficult. You get kind of used to what then has come along, and you kind of forget what used to be there before.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about. You were talking about Grace Episcopal Church. Were you a member of that church?
No, we went. My husband and I were both brought up in the church, and we simply reached a point where the organized religion it turned us off, frankly. And this is before we came to Hastings. We were still practicing Christians, but it was not something that we really wanted to participate in anymore. And so, but we did go to the service there occasionally, and it was. I think probably if we had ever rejoined a congregation, we would have gone there. That's all I can tell you about that. But it had a good feeling. They're quite. They care about people in kind of the right way.
Right. Now, I know that we didn't discuss this on the tape, but in trying to set up the interview with you, you mentioned to me that you had gone to, I think perhaps I could get this wrong, so correct me, Christmas services at St. Stanislaus.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you could share some of your recollections of that experience.
Well, now, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I was kind of going up and down the streets and I'd forgotten about that. No, you really should try to get in touch with some of those people. Well, I have to give you a little history here. My husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 94. And the early stages were not so bad. You usually get maybe 7 good years out of that, depending on your age, before things really begin tuning up. And fortunately, the Hastings newspaper had a notice that a group of Parkinson's related, there was going to be a large meeting at St. John's Hospital of a large group of people, of doctors, nurses, researchers or whatnot, from, they called it a road show. It started from Rush Memorial in Chicago, these people, which is a famous medical center out there, who had been working with Parkinson's disease, which there was very little known about in those days. Anyway, this was set up. So I said to Charles, I think we should go. Because when he was diagnosed, we came to the library, there was one book. There was no information whatsoever really about it. It was very little known. Even the neurologists around hardly knew anything about it. So we went, and part of what was there was the beginning. They wanted to start a Parkinson's support group locally, and so it turned out that there were quite a few people in the Hastings and North Yonkers or other parts of Yonkers, Irvington maybe, who had Parkinson's. So we were all founding members of the local Parkinson's disease support group, which St. John's gave us the space and we could meet once a month. This was 1994. It's still going on. And the reason I'm mentioning all of this is because 2 of the women who were the co-facilitators were Hastings people. Phyllis Richter, whose husband had Parkinson's, she's still here and she's still running the thing, and Tess Sherwood, whose sister had Parkinson's. And now I'm getting to the point. Both of these ladies were very much involved with St. Stan's. They were longtime Hastings people, especially Tess. Oh, Tess, by the way, grew up across the street, the Stone House. Do you know the Stone House?
I know what you're talking about. It's across from the library.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, that was, her family owned that. She and her 3 sisters were brought up in that house. She's in Cabrini now, but her daughter is still living over on Rose Street, Georgette. She could tell you about St. Stan's. And through them, I knew we became aware of of the church, and they were they were what an active bunch. These were local people, the Hungarians, the Polish, the whatever. I think were the ones who originally. I don't know too much about the background of the church, and they had their their annual sale and all the rest of this. And our Parkinson's group had an annual sale, and what we didn't sell, we gave them to add to their sale. Da, 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 da. Anyway, because of those ladies, I would go there. They had, at Christmas time, they had music, and I went to that. They're singers. They liked their music, and they had a lovely little choir. And were you ever in that church?
I know the church, yes.
All right, and then up in the back, where the organ is, and it had such a nice atmosphere, really there was something there. I think because of the care. It was like a small European church where you see the old ladies in there doing the flowers and dusting and whatever, you go in any time of day or night. And these are Catholic churches, of course, I'm speaking about in Europe. We went to funerals, we went to Mass. I had my friend Muriel Anastasi, after her husband died. And then she would reach the point where she couldn't drive, and I knew that she wanted to go to Mass on Easter, so I took her, and we were going to go to St. Matt's, and we got to St. Matt's, and the Mass was not at the time there was just no one there, so then we scurried over to St. Stan's, and so I've been to Mass on that. So that's always been my connection, is because I knew people who were involved with the church. I'm shocked at what they've done to it.
Right. Yes, I think the church sold it, so now it's not owned by the church anymore.
No, but I mean, these new people, I couldn't stand what I can't believe it. Well, anyway, no, this is very interesting because the group that ran Saint and all those years, they worked like dogs, and they had to turn over, so much money to the archdiocese. And then, in the end, they got nothing out of the sale. These people, nothing. New York got the whole thing. And I think they were treated rather badly, but of course I don't know. I mean, they haven't said that.
Right. So I just want to go with the St. Stanislaus. They had a big music program.
No.
Oh.
No. They what I meant by they sang was you go to Mass and they would sing the responses.
Oh, okay.
Which is really nice. I like that.
Right.
And then at Christmas they did carols.
Oh, okay.
And they did, in probably Polish or other languages, I think I went maybe to two of those, certainly one that I remember in particular. And I'm sure they had a choir. They must have had a choir. I mean, it seems to me I remember singing it, in the Mass. But and then when we had the street fairs here in Hastings, the spring thing or whatever, they made that their food, and people apparently loved that. They would buy it. Now I don't know. I can't remember whether they served it there in the church basement and you ate it there. This is not a cuisine that I'm terribly crazy about, but it's the pierogies and the stuffed cabbage and what's the sausage thing.
Kielbasa?
Yeah, yes, yeah. Oh, that, it's and people loved that, and they made it, and this was part of how they made money to keep the place running, because they had to do the painting and the roof and everything else. This is what I meant by, in the end, they were just closed down. This is it. Right. So, I mean, well, all right, so these things happen. I haven't, no one has been outspokenly bitter about the thing, but it probably broke my heart more than theirs, just as a piece of history.
Right, I'm sure. So now, were you or your husband involved in the volunteer fire department or the ambulance corps? Because you mentioned that too.
No, it's just that we had great admiration for those people. This was kind of a village thing, Now I have to be a little careful about what I'm saying here, but these were more the people who'd known each other and grown up with each other. It's you know, and we had such great admiration for the fact that, I mean, we're lucky in this town, frankly. We really are. And they work at it.
Yes, they do.
And my husband, when his condition, I had him at home for a long time, and when it became more than I could do, I finally had to take him up to Hastings-on-Hudson, where he was. And then, of course, I would go every day and spend hours and hours and hours with him. And I got kind of very active with them up there at that point. And the way this relates to the fire department is they would have fire drills in that place. And the fire department would come on purpose, you know. And so I've seen them.
Oh, at the Andrews home.
Oh,
they
yes.
would do regular
Yeah,
drills,
yeah,
right?
they would.
Okay.
So I've kind of seen them in action. So this is, as I say, I think we're very fortunate.
Something that you haven't mentioned, but I'll ask because you never know what people know. Did you have any connection, involvement with the schools, the public schools here in Hastings?
No.
Mm-hmm.
No. You've touched a rather raw spot.
Okay.
No,
then,
it's all right.
Then
No,
we know. Then I don't want to talk about it.
This is not because of the past. It had nothing to do with us. It was this big budget fight 2 years ago when they were so insulting about the seniors. It really bugged me.
you, right?
Yeah. No,
right.
You know, if you don't want to do it, you can sell
you
your
can
house and move.
Right.
This was really rotten. Now, I'm not in the position of where it's killing me to pay, because we were public school people until the university level, and we believed in the public schools. We had no problem with this, and we knew when we moved here without children that we were going to have to support the school system. That was fine. No argument. This is what makes me so mad. But there are people in this town who are really up against it now. Elderly people who had practically teeny little pensions, you know?
Right.
And they want to stay here. They were born here, some of them.
Right.
So, anyway, that really bugged me.
Okay.
But
okay.
But up until then, I had no argument with it because we have a really good school system, and there's something to be proud of. Our kids are getting what amounts almost to a private school education in this town, or they were. I don't know what's going on now. I mean, how do you feel about it?
Oh I won't put my children do not attend school here because they weren't. For us, it was not. How shall I put this? Let's be diplomatic.
Well,
it didn't work.
You don't have this on.
No, it's on now. We can talk about that later. But no, my children don't attend school here. We took them out of this school system.
All
Sent
right.
them away.
Yeah. Well, if there is bullying, and there has been in the past, and one of my neighbors had a gay kid, and so she took him out. A lovely boy. Right. Okay. And I don't go for this down with. Now, you know, that's part of my politics. We're very open to everybody and everything. Color,
Right.
Gender.
Religion, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Right. This is why Pinecrest was great for us. Oh, I want to make one thing clear here.
Yes.
When we came, I would say that the people who came, about every 25 or 30 years, a neighborhood will change. People will die, they will retire, they will move, something will happen. And it doesn't happen all at once, but within a span of about 5 years, there will be this change. Okay, we came at a time when the original integration had been accomplished. The blacks had been buying houses in Pinecrest, and so the situation was stable in that any earlier resistance or settling in or tensions or whatever, this had settled down. There was some of it still there, maybe underneath, but anyway, the surface was fine. So I would say we are what I would call a bridge group of incomers, in that what had happened, and then we were the bridge between the people who had gone through all of that and done the work and the whatever, and what was there at that time. And that's been for the years that I've been here. And now, of course, we're into a transition out the other end because the houses have been now sold. Our racial balance is a lot less. We had many more black people when I came. And it was working very, very well. It wasn't all clustered in one end of the street or the other. It's great. This is the way it can work and work well. But, I don't feel that I am the kind of spokesperson for Pinecrest in the early days. I cannot be that because we weren't here during that time, although we became acquainted with people who told us a lot about it from both sides of the question.
Right.
And in a way, I don't think that unless you've lived through it and been part of it, it's anything that can really be explained in a way that I don't know how much of this should even go into the...
Right.
Yeah. But I'm just making that point with you because it's a life experience. And it's one I wouldn't have missed for anything, and it was one that I probably never could have had in any other way. It was just sheer accident.
Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Well, now let me, just so that I make sure I understand what your life's been like for the 40 years that you've lived in mm-hmm. Hastings. Am I missing any organizations that you might have been involved in Hastings that we haven't talked about? I thought we sort of covered churches and the fire department and the library, and I just want to make sure there wasn't some group of people out there that you dealt with regularly that I just don't know about, so I don't know to ask you.
Not really. Because our life was so spread around between the college, Manhattan, Hastings, the neighborhood. We are participators, but we're not joiners. I don't know how to put that in another way,
And just so, I don't know that we actually got this on the tape, but when you were referring to the college, what are you talking about?
That's Queens College, where my husband was teaching. And then, of course, he was doing a lot of writing and research. People at the university level do a lot of work at home, which was another thing that was good because a quiet neighborhood. And then there are a lot of teachers in Hastings also, by the way, and in our own neighborhood, academic people. So that takes a lot of time, and I was working with him on a lot of things that he was doing, and especially after the Parkinson's kicked in, then I was doing more. And of course, eventually he wasn't driving, so then I was going around with him more. So this has been going on for, 15 years out of the 40. Prior to that, we had parents that we had to deal with, and not locally, unfortunately. So I'm from California, my husband's from South Dakota.
And you met in New York City?
And we met in Manhattan.
What a great place it is, right?
Place.
That some girl from California could meet some guy from South Dakota and wind up in Hastings?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. What we did do, being book people, this is not an organized group, but we would meet with people and talk about books. And we had a small group that we read out loud on Sunday afternoons and this sort of thing. Not the book group that's here in town, that... Sorry, that was not my thing.
Right. This is just groups of people informally?
Informally.
And would they come to your house? Yes, you go to their house?
Go to theirs. Yeah, and we'd decide something we wanted. No, what was different, we weren't just discussing a book. What we were doing was reading aloud, and this is a very interesting thing to do, which a lot of people don't do. You read, and the same thing as the Shakespeare of reading aloud. You take turns, and you're reading. You have the same book. And you read maybe 20 minutes, and then the next person will come on. And you hear, by hearing it out loud, you can take Dickens or anything, or modern fiction, or whatever you choose that you want to do, or the Greek classics, and you hear it in a different way from the looking at it or reading it quietly on the printed page. Have you ever done this?
No, I haven't. No.
Are you interested in books at all?
I love books.
Okay.
I read. I'm a voracious reader of novels primarily.
Okay, all right. Well, if you have a friend or someone who likes the same sort of stuff you do, and I came out of the university, and I said to my husband once, I said, I have a university degree and no education. Because life goes past you so fast in college. At least I found it so. And then getting your life started after that, and half the stuff that I read then, I had no background, no experience to understand. And so, even now, this has saved my life. Of course, is reading. Okay.
Now, where did you graduate from?
The University of Southern California, USC. And this is not the Cal Berkeley line.
No, I know the difference.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And I was a music major and an English minor. After graduation, I came to Manhattan. Now, that was an interesting time in the history of this country because I was in college during World War II.
Okay. And when I came to New York, of course, we were all just getting back on our feet after the war. Now, you weren't alive, but, the war was something that we were scared. I'm telling you, the Germans were off Long Island with their submarines. The Japanese had done what they'd done to Pearl Harbor, and they were doing awfully well out there, killing all our guys in, the islands, Bataan and Guam and all of those places. And for a while, it was quite scary. We were not sure we were going to come out of this. And then we did. And even as a college kid, you're aware of this because people were being drafted right and left. That's another thing. We don't have the draft now. There was the draft then, which although did a lot of good for instance, it helped my husband in the sense that he wound up in the Air Corps in England, and he loved England. He managed to survive the war over there, and he stayed on. He got a Fulbright, started his graduate work in London, University College London, and then was accepted into the doctoral program at Princeton. And all of that, he probably never would have gotten out of South Dakota. Well, he would have, but, so... So you when did you graduate from USC?
46.
46, and then you came right to New York?
I came to New York, thinking to pursue my music here.
Okay.
And then I was a violin major.
Oh.
And right after the war, there wasn't a seat in any orchestra that a woman, it was all men. The harpist was the only female in any orchestra. And also, we didn't have as many symphony orchestras, chamber orchestras, because of the war. I mean, things were just getting started again. And so you do the sort of thing. You either become, today the kids, they either become waitresses or baristas or something. And I don't know how I fell into it. I got a job with American Express doing travel for people at the Fifth Avenue office of American Express, of all things. And I did that for a while. It was a job, and doing musical things on the side, trying to, and it was really kind of a difficult period. And then I decided that the publishing thing kicked in. Oh, you don't want to hear all this anyway.
Okay. No, I was just curious how you came, because you said you got out of university, so I was wondering where you came from. You wound up in New York. How'd you get here?
Well, that's how,
Right,
and,
okay.
No, because I'm a third-generation Californian. My people had been there, forever. Okay. And then my mother, who was alone at that point, came to New York. So then we settled down here, and this became the place. No, but that's how I came.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a break. I'm going to stop. I hope that I know how to do it. We've been going a long time.